Good evening and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk About Mental Health. I'm Nels Kloster. I'm an education psychiatrist and I'm working in Southern Vermont.
And my name is Robert Stack and I'm a licensed alcohol and drug counselor and licensed mental health counselor. Good evening.
And tonight we're back for our third season, which is just an absolutely wonderful thing, I think.
It is.
Yeah. And, we're looking forward to people contacting us again. We have a Facebook page, www.facebook.com/letstalkvt. And we have an email page as well, let's talk about mental health @gmail.com.
And also, we've, one of the things that happened is we went to a production meeting and they talked about what did we want to do with the new season, and I said, last year the purpose of the show was to help somebody, to answer some questions, to take away some of the stigma, some of the shame of addiction and mental illness, and maybe offer some encouragement for recovery. And I felt that sometimes, that's still my goal. That's still our goal, I believe, is to help someone, be of help to somebody. But we also tended to get a little bit more into public policy, talking about, different things about medications, some of our guests, last year. But what I said in that production meeting was that I wanted to get back to that. I wanted to encourage people to contact us, to, ask questions or whatever it might be. And so I just want to say that there are some posters, there's some postcards that people can send to us. There's numbers, and it would just be really ideal if we could get more feedback from our audience, from people who are either struggling with it personally, or someone in their family, or somebody who, if they work in the field and they have some comments or questions. We'd love to hear from folks and make this a more community interactives.
Right, because we started this out, we envisioned this as a call-in show.
Right.
And I guess last season we sort of turned into talking heads in a way.
Right, and we've given up on the call-in.
Well, it's hard. Community television, right? We're on one time live, and then it repeats a number of times throughout the week. So this is an effort of ours, sort of get the posters out in the community, get cards piled around, and that people can actually stamped and addressed, so people can send questions into us, and that way we can hear more from the community.
The only problem I have is when I see my picture on the poster, it makes me cringe. I mean, it's sort of, but other than that, it's okay.
It's a good-looking picture.
It's a good-looking picture, right. One of the things that we talked about, is the first year that we did this together, we talked about the symptoms of mental illness, what to look for, symptoms of addiction, alcoholism. And then last year we tried to do a little bit more focus on treatment and outcomes, and what are people using medications for treatment. And you and I talked about this and have decided that we want to talk a little bit more about community,
right,
and the community resources, and have some guests on from the community and talk about what we're doing as a community.
Yeah, and I think it's a good time for that too, because there's a lot of energy these days about communities working together, right? The governor had a forum in Montpelier this summer, and primarily was focused on the opiate problem, epidemic, however you want to call it. And the idea was that people from communities around the state came together at the State House, and there was some speeches in the beginning, and then breaking up into panels, and then coming back together in various communities. And the idea is that every community has something to offer, right? There's no perfect way to deal with the issue of opiate addiction in any one community. There are some resources that already exist in each of our towns. And so the task coming out of that meeting in the summertime at the State House was to get together people in your community and look at what you have to offer and think about how to address this problem of opioid addiction.
Right, but I also want to make sure that people understand that there may be this opiate explosion of people using opiates and heroin and pain medications, but alcohol continues to be an issue for many of the folks in our state. Alcohol is still today in the newspaper there was something in the woman talking about domestic violence and how she managed to get back her life and what she did. And I think it was like in the third or fourth paragraph, she said alcohol had a big part of this, and it was a huge part of the problem. And so I think it, in one way, I appreciate Governor, last year saying, we have this epidemic, we need to address it. But we also need to understand that it's not just opiates. And there's lots of other drugs, and there's people don't wake up one day and become an opiate addict. I mean, that's just not how it happens. You don't just start shooting heroin. Often there's other drugs involved, and there's DWIs and people suffering. And this is not just about addiction, this program. This is also about mental illness. Right. And so, within our, when you read about Robin Williams committing suicide or something, it's all in the news and stuff. But we have it right here in our community. We have it in our community. We have people who are suffering from mental illness. We have people who are suffering from depression. We have, I don't know if this is fair to say because I don't have evidence of this, but I suspect that we have some of our men that went over to Afghanistan and Iraq who have come back to Vermont who are struggling, and they're getting help. And I really want to stress that as much as we might focus on the increase in addiction or the increase in some of the other problems that we're having, there's also a tremendous amount of people out there being of assistance. Right. People offering help, and whether it's the VA system, Exit One, and Senator Sanders, and the folks who are trying to make sure that there's people there to help the VA. There's a lot going on, and there's a lot of community effort. So if we have a methadone here in our town. We have a methadone clinic. We have doctors providing Suboxone. We have the hub and spoke going on. We have HCRS, we have the private hospital up the road, so not private, but the Brattleboro Retreat. So at the same time that we have this, a focus, if you will, on the problem, I think we want to make sure that people understand that there's a tremendous amount of resources. From inpatient hospitalization, outpatient, to therapy. We have recovery centers throughout the state of Vermont. We have these Turning Point recovery centers. And of course, the number of AA meetings and NA meetings and Al-Anon meetings and Narconon meetings. And there's more and more of them available. There's a 7 o'clock meeting, a noon meeting, an evening. So, I'm hoping that as this goes on, and we'll have different guests on throughout the year, that we really start focusing and talking about, what are we doing as a community?
Yeah, and again, the opiate, issue, it's current event. It's ever present in people's minds. But I was talking in Bennington a few weeks ago at a community meeting there, and the way I presented it is that if we look at opiates, they've been around forever. And they've been, thousands of years. There's a problem throughout the world. So it's not just Vermont. It's not just the U.S. It's the world. And it's not just now. It's historical as well. And that anything that we were going to do in the Bennington community was going to have not just a positive impact on diminishing the impact of opioid use, but was going to generally impact the quality of life for people who live in that town. Because we're talking about things like, living a drug-free life, sure, but talking about having purpose, talking about having good social supports, talking about a sense of belonging to your community that is going to happen with these efforts. And that doesn't just apply to addiction issues. It applies to depression, it applies to anxiety, alcohol, depression. So while we might seemingly focus on single issues or single illnesses, really the base of this is you need to have a community and a quality of life in your community if you're going to be well. Right.
And I think it's worth mentioning too, and I really, you've heard me talk about this, I want people to see drug addiction, alcoholism differently. It doesn't need to be a rite of passage that you have to start drinking in high school, or you have to start doing drugs, or I really, it's sort of this idea that I would hope that people would come to realize that these drugs are not benign, and it's not something that is permissible. And I think, on some level, I almost worry to some extent that we're making it sound as if you become addicted to drugs, we'll help you out. We'll take care of you or something. I mean, I think what we can say is that, we'll help you get better. But ultimately, the responsibility is the individual. Yeah. It's their, you know what I mean? They have to sort of want it. And I think it's fair to say that we're going to hold you accountable. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not just like you get a blank check to, well, if you're an addict or an alcoholic, we'll just like take care of you, Well, not really. Yeah. I mean, I think we should give people opportunities to get better and give them support and have compassion and empathy. But we also need to make sure that people, the community, and is that, if you find yourself in this situation, you have to make a decision to get help. Yeah. You can't just say, well, this is the way it is, and I'm not going to get better, and they're never going to get better. I mean, I think you have to avail yourself of what's available. And that's why I'm hoping that when part of what this show does is sort of highlight what's available.
Right.
And then we can talk a little bit more about motivation and why people may desire to get better. But make that understood. Not that we're focusing, one of the things there was a school of thought when I was in graduate school, about solution focus. In other words, don't look at the problem, look at the solution. And I think we all identified individual drugs as a problem, whether it be crack cocaine or heroin or opiates or pills or alcohol. But to look more as the community as the solution, like what is the solution to the problem?
Yeah, and I think that when people talk about happiness, which I think in many ways around quality of life happiness, that it's never given to you. You have to earn it and work at it. And that's an important piece. It has to be, a lot of people have written about, what it means to be happy, Freud, Buddha, etc. And a few things keep on coming up, and one of those is purposeful activity. A career, parenthood, all these things that are actually, productive and good. And they require effort and they require work. And, love being another thing. I mean, love meaning sort of passion, but also meaning sort of family, community, sense of belonging to a pack. And without these things, you can't be happy, but they all require effort. This doesn't get handed to anybody.
Right. And another piece to this, and this may sound like I'm going off topic, but a man named Ernie Kurtz wrote he was a Jesuit and he was doing some treatment in Boston, and he was helping this woman, and he went away and he came back and he saw the woman and she was much better, and he asked her, how did she get better? And it turned out she had been going to Al-Anon and she was much better. He decided to explore this, and he was at Harvard at the time, and he ended up writing a book called Not God, and it's the history of AA. And basically what he said, AA is a spiritual program, but he was saying that, the first thing they have to agree is that, well, perhaps that there is a God, but if there is a God, they're not God, and that they need help. But one of the things that's always struck me is he said the common bond for most alcoholics, and especially for those who reach recovery in some way, is that they all admit that they're flawed. They all admit that there's something wrong, and they all have suffered, and that suffering is their common bond. And I thought about this, and I say this now because I think as a community this is true. And what happens though with many of us is a member of our family may have mental illness, may be struggling with like an anxiety disorder, or maybe struggling with depression, or alcoholism or drug addiction, and it happens. It happens to the family, and it feels like it's just happening to you. Mm-hmm. And it feels like it's just, and I think because of its alcoholism, because it's mental illness, there's a certain degree of shame. Mm-hmm. And I really would like, one of the reasons for talking about this is to reduce that aspect to it, and to recognize that no matter what family you are, whether you're rich or poor, or whether you've been, your family's been here for 200 years, or you came up last week. I mean, you know what I mean? It's sort of, we all have suffered. We all have suffered from it. And many, many families suffer from alcoholism and drug addiction. Many families suffer from mental illness. And I think collectively, And if we can acknowledge that we have this, you know what I mean? If we can acknowledge that this is a community issue, and not in a way that, you know, like we wag our finger at people, but to understand that this is something that affects all of us, and that our recovery is going to happen when all of us are collectively together. I know that I work in the field, and, you know, normally when you're in therapy, you talk about how, you know, the therapy relationship, and that's how you get better. But I tend to believe that we get better within the community. I mean, you know, forgive me, but, you know, it's one thing to be well in the therapy office and feel good and stuff, but it's really when you go out into the community that you need to make that sense of connection.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, we're pack animals. You know, we're not bears. We're meant to live with other people, be with family, be with friends. So, you know, understandably, we don't do as well. We're just not as healthy mentally and physically too if we're not with other people and have that sense of belonging.
Right, and one of the things, and you know, we've already started to line up some guests, and you know, I've asked Ron Staley, who's the superintendent of schools here, and I'm hoping he's going to come on and talk a little bit about, because, you know, schools have really changed. You know, I served on the school board both in Guilford and Brattleboro for 7 years or so, and a lot of people were talking about how school, not only do we education, but there's a lot of social issues that are also addressed within the schools, right. and that's good. And you know, I'm hoping that we can talk to them a little bit about it. And also David Gardenstein, who's the chairman of select board, but also the town's state attorney. Okay. He's agreed to come on the show and talk a little bit about what's going on there, and we want to do that with more and more people. I mean,
right. And then Mike Fitzgerald, who's the new police chief of Brattleboro, he's going to be on the show with us as well. I think as well bringing a social worker from the police department as well. And I think the reason why we invited him is when they were going through the selection process for police chief, one of the things they mentioned at both the Commons and the Brattleboro Reformer about eventually, you know, narrowing the search down to him and having him go from a captain to chief of the police here, was he had a vision for the community. You know, here's a guy who went to BUHS, went away for his Marine Corps career. But I mean, vision for the community really struck me as being very important, a very special way to approach this job.
And last year, you know, we had Mark Ames come on, talk about recovery centers. We had Representative John Moran come on and talk about what was going on in the legislature. We had the two women were from the
Freedom Center.
Freedom Center. Right. They came out and they talked a little bit about it. And again, you know, it's I hope we do more of that this year. I really want to focus on the work that people are doing in the community and the things that are available to get better. And I think on one hand, we want to help people not get addicted, and, you know, obviously do the best we can with that, make them more aware of the problem. I think in some level, and if you've listened to the show before, you heard me say this before, but, you know, I think in Vermont we were terribly naive. I mean, when I say we, I mean young people, and, you know, we're naive about opiates and sort of were misled by taking a pill, you know, taking a Percocet or taking you know, and if it's medicine, it must be safe, and, you know, it must be okay to take an oxy, you know, and I'll split it up, and it was great. Not realizing that, you know, as you go further down the line, and they sort of shut down the pipeline for illicit drug, prescribed pain medications, heroin was coming into the state. And so a lot of people were switching over to heroin. And so, you know, what started off as, you know, let's get high on a Friday night and let's split a Percocet, you know, or let's do, you know, a little bit of Suboxone that's been subverted or something. You know, it's a very dangerous path, and you're going to end up at the other place. You're going to end up with the heroin problem. And yet, I so much want to make this about, you know, letting people know that you can get better. Yeah. It doesn't have to be this way. People do get better. Yeah. And if last year was a focus on the epidemic, then this year what I want to do is focus on getting better.
On the response to that, yeah.
That's right. And understanding that some people will try to get better and they'll relapse. Some people who are on opiates, they may need to be on a methadone program.
Yeah.
Some of them might be on Suboxone. Some of them may be in Suboxone and then transition off when they feel better. And some of them may just try and go, on opiate blocker maybe, or some of them might try NA or AA.
Yeah, and here's the thing, as we're talking about, our show is actually being played in some other towns as well. So we don't want this to seem like, we're just talking about Brattleboro, because this same sort of a community involvement and different factions in the community working together, not just district attorneys, police chiefs, medical communities, school communities. We have those everywhere throughout the state. In Rutland, there's Project Vision, which has been a very successful coordinated effort with the landlords and housing, and then the police and the social services there. In Bennington, we had a similar meeting a couple of weeks ago. Brattleboro is doing the same thing. Mm-hmm. So we're hoping, of course, so everybody has a schools commissioner. Everybody has a police chief, and so all these people we're inviting. We don't want to make it seem like this is just about Brattleboro, but these people we have here, of course, are representative of people that are present in every community. And I think that one of these things when I was in medical school and redesigning the curriculum there, I learned a very important concept that there's no one perfect way to teach or to in that case medicine, but you take a look at what resources you have and what sort of traditions you have, and you build off of those, and you don't tear things down and start from the beginning, but you develop them from what's already present.
And that's one of the reasons why I want to get back to the email, the Gmail account, the letters, the cards, whatever way that people contact, because we need to make it personal. I mean, it sounds so, it almost sounds like we're clinical. Well, here's this agency, here's that agency, here's this funding. But it's personal. It's family. It's people. And and I know, when I meet people in the community and they'll tell me, they'll say, I have so-and-so in my family and they struggle with this. Or I have someone that's near and dear to me and here's the issue. This past year I went to a funeral for a young girl who had died, and it was. I mean, it's. I don't want to make it personal, as in I want to single out someone. Right, I mean, what I want to do though is understand that it's in everyone. You pick up the paper, and I'm guilty of this. I pick up the paper, I look at the obituaries, I look at the police log. I mean, I look at
because we know a lot of we know these people.
But still, when you look there and you see someone died unexpectedly, or someone, there was an article in one of the national papers, I think it was the Times maybe, and they were talking about in Staten Island, the way they talk about overdose, they say someone died at home. Right. And that is like the code word for dying in an overdose. Right. And so, if they're 31 years old and it says they died at home, people are making the assumption that it's an overdose.
Right. I mean, we as professionals, that automatically, I think, single car accident, untimely death, that's where my mind goes right away, is to overdose or suicide.
And because one of the things that's happening, alcoholism, you would always have the death, and I'm so sad to say this. I mean, or graduation, or, a young person drinking and driving, going too fast. You would have that. But with alcoholism, a lot of times the death was, 20 years of drinking, 30 years of drinking, cirrhosis and pancreatitis and all those other illnesses, heart attacks, all these things. And with opiates, though, sometimes the death is sooner. I mean, you're talking about young people in their 20s and 30s, and it's happening fairly early on in their addictive process. And so, to me, alcoholism is deadly, and it's deadly to the individual. And as I, shared on the show, if alcoholics could keep drinking long enough to kill themselves, there'd be a lot more deaths. But what happens with most alcoholics is they pass out before they can take the lethal dose. Whereas with opiates, that's not true. Right. And you see people, and most people, you talk about doing opiates, and then as soon as you shoot up, you're dead. But it doesn't work that way. For most opiate death, you're nodding, You know, your eyes are closed. You're in that kind of almost comatose way, and then you know your brain starts shutting down. You get to the brain stem, and that shuts down, and then you quit breathing, and your heart stops working, and you're dead. And that's the problem. Sometimes people will see someone nodding, and they'll go back and realize that person's not moving, and not realizing that they're dead, or they're very close to it anyway. And I guess this is a time that we can mention that there are good programs out there to get a blocker, the Nortrexon, and what do they call it?
Sure, the Narcan they're using for rescue squads,
Right.
first responders are using that. They've actually developed a nasal form so that it's no trouble to administer at all. You know, squirts in each nostril to help revive people.
And again, you know, here's a response, but it's a response to the illness. In other words, we don't want you to die from it.
Yeah.
And what I want to stress is I want you to live. You know what
Right.
I mean? You know, like you were saying,
Well,
you know, it's not just about not using, it's about a quality of life. It's about other things.
Yeah. And it's that sense of looking forward towards something I think is really important for people to be well. I mean, we used to talk about, I mean, recovery is a term that gets used for both, you know, all aspects of mental health, right? Addiction and mental health, you know, schizophrenia, depression, what have you. Mm-hmm. The idea of recovery, which it emphasizes the fact of developing a full life. That's what's really critical to this.
And if you don't mind, I'm going to say something about you. I mean, you know, this morning you're working, helping people in the methadone clinic. And this afternoon you're helping the mentally ill who are homeless to find housing, right? The Pathways program.
Pathways program,
which
sure.
we also have. But it's that kind of, I mean, that's really where we need to focus. I mean, we need to be talking about what are the treatment things available. You know, we have our Turning Point up, they have a place up here on Putney Road.
They'll soon be back downtown.
They'll soon be back downtown. That's a great support place. I can't help but mention, you know, because a lot of times, you know, you hear people, you know, African Americans or whatever, you know, recently they had a man named Elmer who was involved with recovery community in town. He died from cancer. A tremendous thing that he did, a lot of good that he did in the community. And I think for a lot of people in the community, their work sort of goes unheralded, if you will. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But there is recovery, and I really want to make that point and focus on that.
Yeah, and again, not just, you know, organizations. I mean, for example, it's a very common at the police chiefs around the state and around the country too, with the addiction issues, that we can't arrest our way out of this problem. And again, absolutely, the day of war on drugs is sort of a failed endeavor. But then too, we can't expect the school system, the teachers to get us out of this problem, nor can we consider treatment professionals to get us out of this problem. These are really concerted efforts. And again, I forget who started the phrase. I've heard it attributed to so many people, but the idea of it takes a village to raise a child, I think is really appropriate.
But you know, somehow we've managed to get people to stop smoking cigarettes. We need to get people to stop doing drugs. And I know, I mean, I just feel that really strongly. So one more time, there's a way to reach out to us. There's a way to contact us. Please do. We're really looking forward to that. We're looking forward to this work.
Right. So again, that's www.facebook.com/letstalkvt or letstalkmentalhealth@gmail.com.
So thank you all very much. It's great to be back. And I'm looking forward to it.